Why did you think it was going to be difficult to tie Meech to this?
Simply because I didn't know who Meech knew. You know, again, I have a man who's the head of a record label. But does that mean that Meech has ordered them or authorized them to act on his behalf to sell drugs? There was no connection. His inner circle was insulated.
Right.
Now, we knew who his brother was. We knew who they were. But we were unable. Nobody was going to flip. We had tried. They tried in St. Louis. They tried in Detroit. We tried traffic stops. Nobody was talking.
Welcome back, everybody, to Crime and Entertainment. I got a very special guest with us today. Please welcome Rand Csehy. All right?
You're correct.
All right, that's good. Listen, man, me and you got contacted. I reached out to you on Facebook because I've done a few shows concerning the cooperation, or maybe not so much cooperation, of Big Meech. And you were part of the original task force that actually took him down, him and his enterprise, when he was in Atlanta. So I reached out to you. You agreed to come on and do the show. First, thank you for coming here. But before we jump into the heart of it, man, I want to know, like, how did you even get into this line of work, kind of where you grew up, and then we'll work our way into that.
Sure. Thank you for having me. I always knew I wanted to be a lawyer. So after I went to University of Georgia, graduated from UGA, and then on to Georgia State Law. And with a concentration, I tried to, once you take your core classes, took constitutional classes, criminal classes, and I've stayed in criminal law. Right out of law school, I was a defense attorney briefly. Then I became a prosecutor in a DUI trial court, or City of Atlanta, which was a had jury trial authority. We tried prosecuted DUIs. And then on my first assistant district attorney job was in Forsyth County, Georgia, a metro county above Atlanta, where I became a drug prosecutor. The state at the time they were phasing in. There was a three-year phase-in of drug prosecutors. They were supplementing the salaries of each DA's office to have somebody dedicated solely to prosecuting drug cases, indicting them, doing their asset forfeiture. We were still a year out at Forsyth, but nobody, I wanted to do the drug cases. Nobody else really wanted to. So it was a good fit. And I was allowed to work closely with the narcotics guys in Forsyth at the time. And we were quite successful. And so from there, started, I got to know DEA, ATF, officers from other agencies. I started to get invited to train officers in Fourth Amendment law, drug law, drug investigations, meth lab investigations. And then eventually I moved down to Fulton County in Atlanta, which is where I did the BMF case.
Okay. Now, there was a situation, you and I talked offline, so if you can't talk about it, that's fine. But you were able to find, like, where stuff had just been being held and sat, and we're talking seizures and money and stuff like that, where you was able to kind of delegate that to certain places to help out?
Well, sure. Well, in Forsyth County, when I first got to Forsyth County, and took over the drug cases, there was one of the detectives had come to me and said, "Hey, we have all this evidence still in our evidence room that we've had for 20, 30, 40 years. What can we do about it?" And he said, "Here's a box with these forfeitures that were instituted, but there was no orders on them." So we started looking at them and realized that that the statute had run. These had been years. Nobody had ever contested it. So we needed to dispose of it. And it amounted to I believe it was almost $500,000 in money that was still sitting in the sheriff's bank account for 20, 30 years. Wow. Weapons and other items that could be auctioned off. So the county was happy, the sheriff was happy, my boss was happy, and it kind of just, like I said, it thrusted me into the asset forfeiture drug prosecutor role.
Yeah, you made a lot of friends real quick with that, I'm assuming.
On that side, at least, not so much the people whose property we took, but
Yeah.
I guess after 20 years, we're still holding out hope that they were going to get their items back. But there were some cool items in there. There was some pearl handled revolvers and a couple houses, and the cars were a little beat up by then. But
Yeah. But where do they store that? Where do they store cars?
Up at Versailles, they would store at one of the three tow yards.
Okay, so they would just take them to a tow yard.
Correct, and they had a deal with them where they just cover them and they just sat there. The forfeited vehicles, once we got them, were either put into service or sold.
Okay, so the BMF case starts to take shape. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Jack Harvey is on this for a while before anybody really wants to pick up and roll with him on it.
Correct. Special Agent Jack Harvey of the DEA. He was a one-man band, and he led the charge. And then shortly thereafter, APD investigator Bryant Burns, they worked very closely together. And I was very close with Bryant and with Jack. I saw Bryant more than I did see Jack, and Jack would lobby me, Bryant would lobby me. They were doing work. They did a lot of great work, and eventually we used it. But in the beginning, again, as I've said before, there was just this resistance. We have a black music label, we have innuendo, we have all these people. We have people being arrested in Detroit, in St. Louis, in L.A., Georgia, but there's no, just because somebody says hello to these guys doesn't make them part of an enterprise. Right. And that's, what the feds would call a continuing criminal enterprise.
Yeah, RICO, yeah.
Right. So it's just, it was not enough for me. And plus, keep in mind, I had my own caseload at the time. I had other responsibilities, knowing that once I devoted to something to this, or any of my energy to this, that I was gonna, it was a one-shot deal. If I swung at this and I missed, it was going to be a disaster.
Yeah.
And plus, if we were wrong, we're going to ruin good people's reputations. So I was resistant.
Do you know when Meech first got on his radar? Because Meech operated out of Detroit for a period of time. From what I understand, he got shot at. I don't know if he got hit, but he got shot at. And all things considered, Meech wasn't necessarily a go-to violence type of guy to handle situations, at least not at that point. And then he left there from the BMF series that's on Stars, went to L.A., made some connections, and then transitioned back to Atlanta. Do you know when he became on Harvey's radar?
I don't remember. Jack and I we were trying to flesh this out a few weeks ago. I think Jack was of the opinion it was around the time that there was a murder of Ulysses Hackett and Misty Carter.
Yes.
Misty Carter was an innocent victim. She was dating this Ulysses Hackett when their home was invaded in the middle of the night, and they were both murdered in their bed. And so it was a little bit before that. We couldn't really figure out. I know that the IRS was already onto them.
Right.
And I believe hooked up with Jack when Jack caught wind of it, and they have their database, and you put the names in, you see what matches up. Mm-hmm. So, I think it was Scartozzi, the IRS agents. They had been working on it. Okay. Jack and I disagree on when he first brought it to me. I thought I said no for a couple of years, but he was of the opinion that I never said no. So,
well, we'll circle back to that later because the shooter and that victim was connected to someone of high importance in Atlanta, and we'll get back to that. So when did he finally convince you to come on to this? Because like you said, you had your own caseload. This was going to be a big commitment. So at what time did that happen? We
started in July of 2004. Okay. We started laying the framework for it. We were laying the framework for a wiretap investigation with the belief or the hope that it would lead us to a BMF case. But and that was, Jack was of the opinion. Jack had this opinion that any drug transaction was 2 degrees separated from a BMF BMF supply.
Right.
And so it was going to put that to the test.
And that's not far-fetched. I mean, because To be honest, their reach, I mean, it went through states and states. I mean, St. Louis, had people in Florida, Detroit, all the way up to LA, where his brother was kind of running shop up there for the transpo. And I mean, that's a lot of people. And you would think that especially nowadays, maybe it's a little bit more prevalent for people to cooperate. And I'm sure it was then too. But for them to have the run that they did, it was still impressive that nobody flipped.
Oh, it was very impressive. I mean, they were, their motto was BMF for life, and they did not snitch on each other in the beginning.
Yeah,
Jack was right. There was 2 degrees of separation. There was some guys who came in out of Tennessee to go back to Tennessee. They were 2 degrees separated from BMF. So yeah, he was right. They were prevalent. They were controlling the city. At least in Atlanta, they were controlling the drug flow.
Mm-hmm. And by and large, the whole city was profiting because they would go to the strip clubs like Magic City. I mean, you see it in the documentary, and I know you say you don't watch a lot of the documentaries, even though you're in them and a part of them. But they are just showering those places with money.
Sure. And they're showering with a lot of counterfeit money.
Yeah.
But still, any publicity is good publicity.
Correct.
For the clubs, they not necessarily for a criminal enterprise,
right?
But when they went out and they had a large following, people were hanging on. And in any situation, when you have that many people following you, you're going to have some trouble.
Yeah.
But they were controlling the clubs. They and where they went, they made their presence known.
Mm-hmm.
But they had some Robin Hood moments, throwing money out of a helicopter, to the folks in the old 4th Ward. Meech had his birthday party, the Meech of the Jungle party, where he had, exotic animals.
He had animals walking down the street.
Yes, he did. And in case what
do you have out there? Elephants? Tigers?
I believe he had an elephant, a tiger, maybe a llama. I still, at the time, again, I know that there was quite a bit of displeasure. Jack was unhappy with it, but again, I was like, okay, so the guy threw a party for himself, okay? A bit over the top, a bit extra, but he certainly got our attention.
Yeah, I think if I'm not mistaken, that was right after he had beat the double murder case.
Yeah, or the Club Chaos.
Yeah,
Chaos.
Club Chaos case.
It wasn't that he beat it.
And they dropped the charges.
Yeah, they dropped it pretty quickly on him. That was that was not a good case.
Yeah,
I think everybody agreed that was a justifiable.
So whenever they're getting this thing going, like you said, they're taking over clubs. They got shirts that say BMF. They're wearing rags, everything else. They're turning what is essentially was a drug organization or drug empire into a brand name, which isn't necessarily the smartest move, but the way he was doing it was trying to make it a record label. And so he was trying to push young artists. One of them was Blue Da Vinci. And I think we're past the 10-minute mark now. Give me your opinion on Blue Da Vinci.
Well, speaking of pushing young artists, he should have just pushed them in front of a fucking train. So in the midst of our investigation, when we started firing up, they had I believe it was the Source Awards, and Blue Da Vinci won the best album of the year.
No way.
I can't remember. He won something. I mean, so and it was like, you got to be kidding me. I mean, maybe he could win the best blowjob of the year, but he was if you ever listen to the guy, somebody played his CD in the task force office, and I threw the CD player away. It just could not be salvaged. It's just, there's no doubt. And BMF paid off the judges for him to win the award. And again, it was just I've said it before, this hubris, that like we're untouchable. And Blue Da Vinci is just the word. He's just terrible. I mean, if he came out with a country album, I don't even think they could pay them to give him an award.
Like they did Beyonce.
Right. But he was back, and it's just, and then, so, but yeah, his music just sounds like, if you can imagine a chipmunk, like on a chalkboard being molested by a Great Dane, that's what Blue Da Vinci is. I cannot say enough about how much I do not enjoy Blue Da Vinci.
What about Jacob the jeweler was tied into this?
He was. He did their jewelry.
So he did all their jewelry. And was his part of it more like a money laundering aspect? Because all the rappers, if you remember back in those days, Ja Rule, everybody was talking about Jacob the jeweler.
Sure.
You know, that he would be the first to see Jacob. I mean, he was supplying all the, the rappers with the diamonds. What was his role with BMF?
He made some of their pieces. I remember, I wasn't, my position on that was he was not in Atlanta.
Right.
I didn't want to deal with it. It was, he got paid drug money, laundered money. So, tell me somebody who owns a legitimate business who hasn't received laundered money without them know. It's not enough that you suspect that they're drug dealers. If they want to act like drug dealers, So I never really. I think they ended up getting him, indicting him for something.
He did. He got a couple of years. I don't remember exactly what it was. I was just curious if it became to a certain point where it was knowingly money laundering. Because, like you said, how many businesses probably take drug profits? They might know. They maybe not know. But I mean, like car stereo places.
Sure.
You think guys aren't coming in there dumping $15,000 in a stereo system? They didn't just save that up in a piggy bank.
Right. And sure. And I think that's how they did get him because he was receiving cash to make these items. And again, too, I said, I defended it, but in the end, of course he knew.
Yeah.
Of course you do. When you're getting large cash payments that are above and beyond the actual value of the items that are being made. But yeah, he was.
Maybe that's where it would come in.
Yeah.
If you're charging $10,000 for a diamond, but you're getting $20,000 in cash, then you're a little bit more complicit. You can't really hold that. I didn't know card.
Sure, and there, some of these pieces that he made, and I saw a few of them. They weren't great quality diamonds, but for some kid who's never had anything, and then he can have a diamond encrusted BMF, or Blue Da Vinci can have a diamond,
But that's interesting though, how they had all that. They tried to turn this thing into a music brand, which in actuality is not a horrible idea, because then you're able to account for some of this money coming in. And a lot of times there's a buddy that Matt and I know named Pete, and he even said that a lot of times drug proceeds were washed through the music industry because you would put a lot of money behind this artist. You would buy umpteen CDs that you would sell, and even if they didn't sell, you're going to say they sold because you were selling them at swap meets and flea markets. Sure. And if they didn't sell, you just throw them over a damn bridge. And, if they blow up and become something, great, then you have legitimate money. If they don't, then you can write off all this stuff. We tried this, studio time, whatever. You're writing off money, and it's going to help you on your tax. So there's a lot of good things that can come out of it. When I say good, I mean beneficial to what they're doing.
Of course.
Beneficial to what they're doing. So that wasn't the craziest idea, but the putting up of the billboards, to me, I mean, and Meech even says this in the phone conversation. She's like, I wasn't trying to rub it in their face, but what do you think it was going to do?
Right. I remember the day it went up. I was driving to work, and I almost drove up on the curb, and I said, I remember thinking to myself, and I told Jack this, was that Harvey's going to be in my office. I already knew that I was going to get a visit from Jack that day. And sure enough, he was pissed about the billboard. My boss, the district attorney, was pissed about the billboard. Everybody's like, oh, have you seen that billboard? Because at this point, it was well known. I did not want to do this case. Yeah. I just did not feel it was enough. And then too, my position was, well, okay, they're black mafia entertainment. They're acting like they're a bunch of bosses. They're wearing suits. He has a cigar with his feet up on the desk, and there's an old white guy who happens to be the mayor of Miami in the billboard. But okay, that was odd. But again, what were we going to do about it? It was it didn't, in my mind, it didn't prove criminal enterprise.
Right.
Of course, we were still trying to work that angle, or the investigators were. And after Blue Da Vinci won that award, and you heard him, it was clear they were not going to make any money from him.
Right.
And then the rumors about the bribes. So we started getting more and more, it started looking more and more like a front. Because certainly nobody in their right mind could have thought that Blue Da Vinci was going to carry that enterprise.
Right.
I think everybody agrees with me on that.
Why did you think it was going to be difficult to tie Meech to this?
Simply because I didn't know who Meech knew. Again, I have a man who's the head of a record label. Now, say he's a record label head. And there are people who may know Blue Da Vinci. Their only artist was Blue Da Vinci, right? So these people may have been seen hanging out with Blue Da Vinci. But does that mean that Meech has ordered them or authorized them to act on his behalf to sell drugs? There was no connection. His inner circle was insulated.
Right.
Now, we knew who his brother was. We knew who they were. But we were unable. Nobody was going to flip. We had tried. They tried in St. Louis. They tried in Detroit. We tried traffic stops. Nobody was talking. We could not get close to Meech, which worked to our advantage in the end because a wiretap is a last resort that you have tried and exhausted all other investigative techniques. Mm-hmm. So you
start these wiretaps, and that's what, on their phones?
Yes, sir. That's on. We start off on one phone. Young man by the name of Raphael Allison. They called him Smurf. He was just a low-level, street-level dime slinger, and he would go to the bus stops in the morning, these 12, 13-year-old girls, and grab them before they got on the bus and get their nails done, get their hair done, and have sex with them. And it was causing quite a stir in the community. And so one of our investigators brought it to us and thought it might be a good opportunity to at least try. He knew that our boss wanted to do the wiretaps. And again, under this premise that 2 degrees of separation, we said, okay, we'll try it. We'll do it. And it was a good case because, again, nobody was talking. We had no other way to get this guy Smurf. So a wiretap was good. Was a good technique. And if it failed, we weren't out too much.
Right.
So that's what we went. We went up on Smurf. And,
can we talk about how that happened?
Yeah. So we went up on Smurf initially, and I said before, he was a mumbler. He was just, he's like, this is how it was. The first 90 calls, 3 seconds, and our agents would just bang your heads. Like we would slow it down, and we'd never understood what he said. And then we started deciphering some of his gibberish. But in the midst of all this, this is how ratchet he is. He gets mugged in broad daylight. Right? This jump out crew, they jump out on him, they steal his phone, and they steal his drugs. Right? Like he's on the phone, and you hear this robbery going down, and then they drive away. And so, and then I think he calls his mother, or he uses somebody else's phone that we were up on, and just to tell him what happened, or somebody's relaying this story. And so we're sitting there thinking, what do we do now? Like, he don't have the money. They just robbed him of his money, his drugs, his phone. So we tracked down that phone. We tracked down the guy who steals Smurf's phone. And he's a couple blocks over. We roll up on him. Our agents, masks on, take him down, pat him down, grab his phone, and gone. And so now the problem is, how do we get the phone back to Smurf, right? So somebody says, we just roll up on him and throw it at him. See what happens. Well, okay, it's like all this time, like we won't know how to get another phone number on them. So that's what these knuckleheads do. So we decide, well, we have no other choice. So the same jump out van, same jump out guys, they run at him. Smurfs stand there, they throw the phone at him, it hits them, and they jump in the car and they leave. Now, 10 seconds later, he's calling by, yeah, man, I got my phone back. They're afraid of me. They came and brought it back to me. He said, sorry, and never questions, what the hell was that? Like anybody else in their right mind would think, it's a little fishy, right? And so months later, when we're debriefing some of the other defendants, one of the guys says, if he had told me that, I really wish he would have told me that. He goes, I probably would not have bought the kilos from it or brought him all those drugs. We're like, yeah, like really not the smart. And he never questioned it. Even when we indicted him and we saw him in court, I had to tell. It was just one of those moments I had to explain to him. And he's like, no, man, I got it myself. I'm like, no, you didn't. It's just, he was fried. It was one moment of levity in that case, but he was a knucklehead.
Is it true that you guys were listening to these wiretaps when you started getting more of them? And around the same time, there's a famous TV show called The Wire. And they're doing almost essentially what BMF is doing. And they're talking in the show about how to beat wiretaps by getting rid of phones and only keeping them a certain amount of time and not doing certain things in text messages. Y'all are hearing them talking about The Wire and how they're beating the system?
We were. the guys above Smurf, DeCarlo Hoskins and his crew, and I think the wire would come out on a Sunday night back then.
Yeah.
And so this was a Monday night that they were recapping it. And DeCarlo and one of his buddies, they were talking about it. And the episode that night before had been where they suspected there was wiretaps, and the ringleader, they'd gotten all the phones together, and they had just been trading out SIM cards, but this time they smashed all of them because they realized that the IMEI numbers could still be traced. And we were sitting there, we're white knuckling it. And we'd even spoken about it that morning, been like, gosh, I hope these idiots aren't watching it. And sure enough, they're recapping it. And they're like, man, good thing these guys aren't smart enough to do this. Nobody's ever done one of those. And a bunch of hicks, blah, 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 blah. And they're like, well, we should change our numbers. Oh, yeah, I got my new number here. Here's all y'all's new numbers. So they go, we're going to turn these phones off, but here's the new numbers. So the minute they turned them off, we were up on the other ones.
Yeah.
And again, when we took DeCarlo down, he was just matter of fact about it. He was like, man, he goes, I knew I should. We're like, you were watching The Wire. He goes, I know. I don't know why I didn't. And we're like, we don't either. I mean, so there's 2 instances where we could have been foiled immediately.
Yeah. Is it true? And I had a mob guy tell me this. He said he would change phones every 30 days because it took a month to get a wiretap on a phone. Is that true?
Maybe. Well, yeah. So no, I would say it's not true. But it also depends on what year that was.
This would have been probably earlier on, maybe I say earlier on, maybe 80s, 90s.
Technology was a lot different then because, on the wiretap affidavits and applications, you have to explain how the whole process works. Okay. And so it still has a lot of that old language where it talks about the loop and the POTS, what's called a POTS line, POTS, which stands for plain old telephone system.
Right.
Which we don't use anymore, obviously, because we're on digital 5G, but it still tracks all that language. But just drafting it, and again, the feds, it does take that long. Right. It has and always will. When we got to streamline.
This would have been the feds for him, though.
Okay, so the feds, so yeah, it depends which office as well. As far as I was concerned, I would be able to, once we got a new number or a phone dropped, I was back up within the day. And we had worked it out with the telephone companies that they knew we weren't going to dance with them every time. We were going to send it to them and we were going to be back up on it.
Okay. One of the first big kind of chinks in their armor is from a guy named Doc Marshall. Tell us how that went down, the ramifications of that. And he was kind of the guy, if I'm not mistaken, that was in charge of putting the vehicles in these guys' names.
That's correct. He was their finance. Doc Marshall was their finance guy, if you will. He had a place over off Angier, I think it was Angier Court in the old 4th Ward. And one night, I got a call from Brian Burns, who got a call from dispatch. There was a home invasion and self-defense and killing in self-defense. The home invaders were killed in self-defense. Because when the police rolled up, Doc Marshall and his buddy Dave were there. I think they were walking Dave downstairs to the basement where there was a vault, literally a vault, to steal their drugs and or money. And Doc was waiting for them in the vault. So when they turned the corner, he blew them away. And when the police arrived, obviously they complied. They told the cops, hey, it's self-defense. And the cops were like, yeah, it was self-defense, but you left I think it was 11 kilos just sitting right there in the vault. So.
And thinking maybe sticking that in the yard.
Right, or just maybe, I don't know, putting a plant over it, maybe a nice shawl, I don't know, a book, anything, So I don't know. They had moved other kilos. The thought was that there had been a hell of a lot more there that got moved out and that the police arrived too quick. And so when the time came for his bond hearing, we'd spoken, obviously I knew who everybody thought he was. They said he was BMF. There was no confirmation of it. And before we could get started, his attorney made a comment. He wanted to exclude any reference that I would make. This is just a bond hearing, mind you, that he was a member of BMF or that BMF even existed. or that he was tied to somehow or a conspirator with BMF, and he was a businessman. And I looked at the judge and I said, we never said a thing about BMF. You know, literally, you just revealed its existence.
Yeah.
And from there, we spoke with him and he cooperated. The feds picked him up and worked him pretty good.
And these vehicles that they were getting, they weren't just your average limousines, vehicles. They were like some high-tech shit. And some of those interviews, I think that guy said he was like, you had to have the temperature on 72 degrees. You had to have the gear shifter in neutral. You had to press up on one window, down on another window, and then another button. The seat had to be all the way back. I mean, just like 8 or 9 different things for panels to open up. This shit was crazy.
It was quite intricate, I guess. Yeah. I knew one of the guys who actually did trick those out for them, and they never did one the same. And if you didn't know the code, you didn't know how to do windshield wipers, music up to this volume, this thing. It was virtually impossible, and you couldn't figure out where it was. So yeah, they had these vehicles, and plus they had a whole fleet of Dodge Magnums at the time. Everybody was driving a Magnum, which makes it quite difficult to follow when you have 16 in a row and they all decide to break off.
Yeah,
it was smart.
And I think, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, but after everything went down, wasn't there a situation where an individual got a hold of a Hummer or something that wound up having a substantial amount of cash in it?
Yeah, so this is one where it's well known how I feel about the FBI on this one. So yeah, after we executed all of our warrants, we seized a Hummer limousine, and while we were there, we knew there was money in it. We'd already been told there was money in it. It was the Hummer that we'd been looking for, and we couldn't figure out where it was. So somebody had the bright idea, hey, we'll give it to the FBI, a forensic auto squad. And they searched it, and a couple days later, I get the phone call, sorry, the best agent, at doing this, he couldn't find it. He says, there's no money in that vehicle. They auctioned it off, and sure enough, this older man who bought it, in about 5 minutes, he managed to flip the switch, and the ceiling opens up, and $1 million plus falls out.
Jesus.
So yeah, and again, thank you, FBI.
What's your acronym for them?
Well, the famous but incompetent,
but incompetent,
or the fumbling, bumbling idiots.
And that guy turned it in.
He called the feds, and they took it. He got a finder's fee, and I know a lot of people laugh about that, but perhaps he was thinking that he was getting set up, or perhaps he just didn't want the trouble. It's better to ask permission than forgiveness in this situation when dealing with the federal government.
I would think $1 million could get me out of a lot of trouble. I could stay out of trouble if I had $1 million.
Well, yeah, unless they take that $1 million also.
In the very least, I'm going to call and say, hey, I just bought this car and $500,000 just fell out of the damn sunroof.
And that's exactly
I don't know what's going on here.
But,
and that way I'm going to cause problems with somebody else because they'd say, well, we left $1 million in there. Well, look, $500,000 fell out. I don't know what happened.
Too, maybe it was maybe he's one of those where it's, his conscience got the best of him.
Yeah, I'm sure that would have happened to me a lot later after everything that happened.
It wouldn't happen to me at all.
Yeah. Well, me neither. I was just trying to at least give me some bit of good that when in my 80s I'd have thought about it. So that was the first domino to fall. Then the Club Chaos shooting. You've got Anthony Wolf Jones, and I forgot that other guy's name. His last name was Gertie. They go to Club Chaos. Meech is in there with a girl that I guess is with or was with Jones at one time. I guess they have words in the club. It gets heated in the club. Then they go outside. As they go outside, they're posted up on BMF's cars outside. Mm-hmm. And then all hell breaks loose.
Sure.
What is your...
this is one where I've said, sometimes there's just some people who need killing. And Wolf Jones, he picked a fight, he picked a fight with the wrong people.
Yeah.
There was always the backdrop to that too, is, Wolf was, he was one of, I can't think of it, BIG's bodyguards.
Right. Or Puffy's, but yeah,
Puffy. But he was supposed to be there the night that Biggie was killed.
Yeah.
So there was
Gene Deal was there in his place.
And so there was this attention. There was some allegations that there was words about that. But again, they should have just walked away. They waited. They laid in wait for them, and Meech and his one of his guys, Amin Height, who go by the name Bull, just got the drop on him. It was the clearest case of self-defense.
But they really tried to hang it on him with the double murder. He was in custody for a while, couldn't leave. I think there was a point in time where he was even being streamed live to the clubs that he used to go to because he couldn't leave his house.
That was, I believe that was. We didn't want, that was in Fulton County, the homicides, the murders, they ran their course.
Right.
We had nothing to do with it. That was the murder unit running their course, and then the case was eventually dismissed.
So in that case, though, y'all kind of probably wanted them to hurry up and dismiss this shit, because if he's now even further removed from the action on the street, it's going to make y'all's job a little bit harder. So you're probably trying to say, look, get rid of this shit. We're fixing to get him on a whole lot more, and you ain't even going to win this.
Well, maybe they were. I mean, I was all for. I mean, I didn't care. Again, I didn't want to do this case, so it was before my case. So if they took him off my plate, it was just one. It was just another thing I didn't have to deal with. I just, again, up until the last minute, I was not in on this case.
Right.
I was reluctant. At the end of the day, though, Jack was my friend.
Yeah.
I had a boss telling me what to do also. And I wasn't going to let somebody else do it.
Right.
There was all, I was arrogant enough to believe and to know that I was the only one who was able to do it with these guys. Because these guys, Jack and those guys, they're not going to work with just anybody. I mean, I've been working with them for years on other cases. There was a rapport. And again, if you're not familiar with how, the language and how they act and how they talk and what they think, you're just going to hit a brick wall.
Yeah. He eventually does. The charges get dropped. That's when he has that damn birthday / welcome home party with all the animals in the street.
Meech of the Jungle,
that you were talking about, Meech of the Jungle. Then there's also the shooting that we referenced earlier. And I wanted to circle back to that because the person that took out Ulysses, what was his name?
Ulysses Hackett.
Ulysses Hackett. And then, what was it?
Misty Carter.
Misty Carter. That guy's name was Tremaine Graham. He's kin to the mayor of Atlanta.
He was, yeah. He was the son-in-law, married to her daughter. Yeah.
What kind of dynamics did that bring up?
So the night of the murder, when they are murdered, a call goes out to APD, to the headquarters, inquiring about any information they may have about a murder in this area at that location. This is before homicide was ever we call the Hat Squad. Mark Cooper, who was a great homicide detective, before he was even assigned, before APD was even alerted to a murder. So the mayor, Shirley Franklin, there was a call from City Hall inquiring about this murder. So we knew that Tremaine Graham had gone to her and told her what had happened. Later on, when it came out but this didn't come out for a while. When it came out finally that it was going to be revealed that Shirley Franklin and Tremaine were connected, that's when she came out and finally, announced that was her son-in-law, but not till she had plenty of advance notice to work this one out.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
I never believed that she didn't know.
Yeah.
I get it, family, but
wasn't there also a big break for, I guess it would be just a pullover or a stop in South Carolina? One of the guys that was driving one of the cars, didn't he get pulled over in South Carolina?
I don't remember. You're talking about Tremaine?
No, not Tremaine. This was another guy. Was it Amari that got pulled over?
You're talking about in our case?
Yeah.
That was on I-20. No, that was his brother Jeff. When we got when we seized the kilos?
Yeah.
Okay. So towards the end, Omari McCree and his brother Jeff Lear, they kept freelancing drugs. And so the wires were starting to go down. They were getting quiet again. So we decided, Jeff with his girlfriend, Courtney, it was right off I-20. We pulled him over. We knew they had cocaine in the truck because they were moving it where they had it stashed. We jumped out, introduced ourselves, took his cocaine, and sent him on his merry way, hoping to what's called tickling the wire.
Yeah.
So that's what we did, and it achieved its intended result. I mean, he called his brother. The call went like, Omari, he said, "Hey, what's up?" And all he could say was Yogi's house. And Omari's like, "What the fuck are you saying?" And he's like, he could not. So Omari kept hanging up on him, and so finally he's like he could not get it out. He was shaking so much, and they still couldn't figure out what we were doing.
Didn't know why they let you go.
No idea.
But I mean, it makes perfect sense what you're calling and tickling the wires. He's got to explain this away because number one, it makes him like a rat.
Absolutely.
That if he
or a thief
or a thief more than anything, because they're going to be like, yeah, cops pulled you over, they took the drugs and left you a business card. Get the fuck out of here.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that was his option. It was like, okay, either I was dirty with all these cops and we took it, and Courtney was flipping out, his girlfriend was flipping out, or you took the drugs that you were told to move, right, and it made up this story. Or you sold the drugs. Either way, he knew he was in trouble.
Yeah, because it seems like the nucleus that kind of held them together at that point in time was starting to dissipate. Because I think they even found out that Terry was cutting the imports from L.A. before he was ever giving it to them. They found out, and then they cut ties. Because for a while, Big Meech and Terry weren't even talking.
Right.
They kind of cut ties because they didn't want that to be done. They didn't want it to be getting cut up there. He was maybe making an extra couple keys from everything that he was cutting. And then once that got word, they kind of broke apart. But now you got people under Meech's camp is, skimming off the top and selling on their own. So the bond that they all started with had slowly started to dissolve. I think that's greed more than anything.
Absolutely. And in familiarity, the familiarity, invincibility, even, it's, any organization can only get, in order to grow, you need people.
Yes. And
they weren't like going to Tufts and doing or Penn and doing an employment drive. They were going to the streets, and in Atlanta, Omari, and think about this, Omari and Jeff were the best the old Fourth Ward had to offer. These are not, they were not going to grace the cover of brain surgeons today, unless they were being the surgery itself.
So at what point did you guys figure you had enough to start bringing everybody down?
Well, as we moved our wiretaps, as we moved up a step, what we would do is we would take the first step down. So when I went up on the second phase, which was DeCarlo Hoskins, we took down Smurf and the original wiretaps.
Right.
When I took DeCarlo down, then we went up on Omari, so that step two couldn't tell step three what we were. It was a security issue, but it was to clean it up and to show progress.
Yeah.
And then with Omari and Jeff, we played with them. I mean, we messed with. We had enough to arrest them on their phone calls alone, but then we got them with the drugs. But eventually, our hand just got pushed. We had no choice. We had to take everything. Meech had enough. They were clearly trying to liquidate, and they were shutting everything down. They were dropping telephones, and it was our only chance. And if they'd shut all their phones down and moved, we'd have been back at it.
Well, he did move. I think he moved to Houston, right?
Well, that's when he ran.
Yeah. Well, yeah, when he ran. Yeah.
But we still knew where he was at that point. But I'm saying if they just turned off their phones and they moved, where we would be back where we started. All this work was for naught. Mm-hmm. So we decided. I think it was 2 days before Thanksgiving. We decided to get search warrants and to do what we could.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it did not amount to much. Everybody, it's because of the way the story ends. Everybody thinks that we had this grand, epic, cathartic, finish. It was quite the letdown, actually. Yeah. We were done, but we didn't have much to show for it.
Really?
On that last day, Meech was in the wind. Omari was in the wind. We got Jeff and Courtney. Yogi was in the wind. I mean, we had warrants for everybody. It was a conclusion, which was fine with me, because I was just as happy to let the warrants ride and let the feds deal with it.
What? And they got J-Bo too. He was
I forgot about
kind of the
J-Bo.
guy
I
that
did
took
forget about
over
J-Bo.
When Meech had kind of. I think he started taking over a little bit when Meech was on house arrest, and then he became a major player. Then Meech fled. I think it was to Houston.
To Houston.
And because Yogi talks about it in that documentary about a point where he's saying he's got to get out of here. The heat's coming down.
That was the day that we were going up on.
That was the day that they were going up on everybody. So he barely had to get out of there.
Yeah, we hit his house. There was still a blunt burning in the ashtray. I think there were beans on the stove still, hadn't even boiled yet.
You know, on the documentary, a cop goes to him and tells him they're fixing to make a move. That's how he knew to get out of there. On the BMF, I know you say you never watched this, so I'm telling you something you don't know. On the documentary, or maybe you do know it.
On the Stars show?
On the Stars documentary, a cop goes to Meech's house, knocks on his door, and tells him, hey, they're going to be coming for you today. If you don't want to go to prison, you better get in the wind.
No kidding.
Yep. Now, they didn't say the name, obviously, but a cop gave him that info to get in the wind.
Well, we knew that we had some leaks. It wasn't from within our organization, though.
Yeah.
I think that might be a little. I don't know. I'd have to look at that, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, it could be fabricated, but
Sure. We knew that it was an attorney. We knew they had an attorney, and somehow that attorney had, whether he was guessing or he just surmised based upon what the volume, the activity. He went to the DA's office. I knew he asked about me, where I was, casual conversation. They're seeing us through warrants. It might have been one of those things, but we knew we had some law enforcement that was compromised.
When you finally took down everybody, you finally got everybody, Meech, Terry, the whole nine. Did it surprise you they eventually took a plea deal?
No, I don't think it did.
Because Terry wanted to fight, even though Terry was worse off on everything else. Meech was the one that was, even though as much as front and center as he was, and he was the figurehead, Terry was on more damning evidence.
Sure.
Than Meech. Meech probably technically could have fought it, but in doing that, then you're hanging your brother out to dry as the guy that ran the whole damn thing.
Sure. Individually, yes, it was not a great case against Meech or Terry, but taken as a whole, and Omari had flipped. Omari had given, when we arrested him, he gave a Mirandized statement where he implicated Meech.
Yep.
And then that plus the phone calls. I mean, we're the only ones who caught Meech on a wiretap. I think we had 2 or 3 of them, but it was enough, and it was damning enough. And I think, as you said, they were talking about, getting ready to move, and what do they have, how do they get in? Who's the snitch? He was talking crazy. My name was mentioned. A couple of the other agents were mentioned. They saw us in their rearview mirror by accident. We weren't even trying to be up on them. We were having lunch, and we just all happened to be in the same place at the same time, and that caused the wire to get tickled. And then Terry, he had been laying low, but the couple of phone calls where they'd captured him, I think in L.A. or maybe out of St. Louis, where he said, that Meech is going to be the end of us, and I think at one point he even says he should take care of Meech.
Yeah.
And they were not talking. Yogi had gone out there to mediate, and again, that's the connection. We knew there was a connection.
Yeah.
Terry was the quiet brains behind it.
Yep.
Meech was the base of it and the brains. Had this been a legitimate enterprise, I respected them to some extent. What they built had never been heard of.
I don't think you'll be able to build that again just because of the amount of loyalty it does, and eventually, everything will break down eventually.
Sure.
But for the longevity that they did have, and as long as it took them to finally get some chinks in the armor, it's impressive for what it was.
Absolutely. Excuse me. And if you think about it too, that was the last time, that we had a domestic national drug organization network, pretty much. Now we have the cartels. After that, the cartels came in and they divvied it up and they took over their route. The routes that BMF used are the routes and the hubs that the cartels use now. But it really was the last domestic narcotic organization.
So you guys broke up a lot of cocaine traffic even after that.
Well, yeah, and
just from
sure.
letting the routes be discovered.
Sure, I mean Chicago, St. Louis. I'm assuming they did. Yes, I mean we did such a great job that we allowed Mexican cartels to come in. So, the law of unintended consequences. nature abhors a void.
Yeah.
What they were is what worked to their advantage. Nobody believed, one, that we'd have, the mafia. Yes, you could believe that as a well put together, coast to coast organization.
Right.
But a black mafia family, it had never been done.
Right.
And so they used it to their advantage.
Well, he took he loved a lot of those movies like Scarface,
Sure.
which is why the BMF, The World Is Ours, or whatever, that come from Scarface. Yeah. He watched a lot of gangster movies. He took a lot of notes and, ideas from how they ran stuff. I mean, He was a big movie guy.
And they all have their Scarface, velvet posters and stuff, because that's what everybody wants to grow. I know I did. Growing up, I always wanted to have my own Scarface dollar bill velvet.
Everybody did, I think.
Paint by number, all that, Because at the end, it's such a great story of how you die.
Yeah.
It's
take it out in your own bathtub in the middle of your... No, it wasn't a bathtub, just a water fountain in the middle of your living room. Yeah.
But it's that gangster lifestyle, but it's like they missed the point of that movie.
Yeah, they do miss the point. No matter how high you get, you're going to get clipped off.
Exactly.
At some point.
And Meech, I think, to his credit, I think he saw early on when we first started doing our wiretaps that he did not want this. He wanted to shut it down and to go quiet for a while.
Yeah.
It's just, again, it's who you surround you. Isn't that the story of life? It's who you surround yourself with.
Well, I think even though I heard him say in that documentary, well, he's actually in prison, but he's talking on the phone. And he was like, he could have retired a while earlier, but he had to kind of keep going because he said, I couldn't trust anybody to keep running it. He's like, so if I just leave and they mess up, it takes everybody I love down. So I stayed out of loyalty to all my people. Now, whether you agree with that or believe it or not, who knows? But when they eventually do, the story from the documentary is they meet in the courtroom. First time they've actually met in a long time because they weren't talking before they got arrested. I don't think they seen each other after they got arrested. They meet in the courtroom that day. It's very heated. They're yelling. They're arguing, I guess because Terry wanted to go to trial. Meech didn't. They finally did agree to come out, and they do a plea agreement for... was it 360 years?
Right.
Or 360 months?
Right.
360 months. Because in doing that, and that's important, they avoided the death penalty or essentially life in prison. So you have an end date.
Right.
It might be 30 years from now, but you have a date that if you make it and you're alive, you're coming out of prison. That was I think the ultimate goal is to not be in prison for life.
Sure.
And so a lot of people want to say, well, they cooperated when they got that. They didn't cooperate. They took a plea deal. Now, fast forward all these years later, obviously there's a show being done by 50 Cent called BMF, which the main character is being played by Meech's son, Little Meech. And seemingly everything was good because Meech gets out on a halfway house, I guess, style release towards the end of 2024, like December-ish, posing for pictures with 50 Cent. Everything's good. Then, all of a sudden, he posts a picture with Rick Ross, who is just the immortal enemy of 50 Cent. Those guys do not like each other worth a damn. And all of a sudden now he's alluding that Big Meech was a rat and he cooperated and all this, that, and the other to get time cuts all through a woman named Tammy Cowens. Do you know anything about Tammy? Did you ever meet Tammy? And I know you've reached out to Jack on this. Can you give us some clarity on this situation?
So, sure. Let me unpack this one.
Yeah.
So Tammy Cowens, I never knew she existed until a few weeks ago. However, she was Meech's right hand or close confidant. And here's what happened. After Meech was arrested or indicted or in sentence, I believe, she goes to Jack Harvey. And she says, there was a provision in the federal law where you can do a proxy cooperation. So I'm in prison. You want to help me out. You go and say, you'll be an informant and you want me to get the credit of my sentence.
Third-party cooperation.
Third-party cooperation, exactly. Jack Harvey, my understanding was he was ready. He was close to retirement. He didn't buy her. He didn't buy what she was selling, making grand promises and whatnot. Another agent, a group leader, ends up she gets passed on to him.
That's Cromer.
That's Keith Cromer. And apparently somewhere in the mix, somewhere thereafter, they I don't know, they begin an improper relationship.
Correct.
No money, no drugs, no influence, just an improper personal relationship. And then shortly thereafter, he gets reassigned to Afghanistan. He tells her that it's over. She says, if you go to Afghanistan, you'll be sorry. So he goes. He needs it it's his career advancement. And she blows the whistle and says, I'm having an affair with Keith Cromer. She never did any. She never gave any information. She didn't provide any assistance on the record. Meech never asked for her to cooperate. Again, you're sitting in prison. If somebody out there says, I want to donate all my goodwill towards this person, there's not a whole hell of a lot Meech can do about it.
Right.
But it didn't happen. And when I asked Jack about this a few weeks ago, Jack told me point blank, Meech did not cooperate. And Jack is one of the very few people in this world that if he tells me something, it's true. I've been 25 years and never known him to lie. And I don't expect him to start today. He's a good, honest man and agent.
Yeah. And I mean, if you even look at Meech's time, I mean, 30 years, then you're only going to do 85% of that, provided everything goes online. So that knocks it down to roughly 25 and a half.
Right.
He's benefit of the sentence reduction and the guideline changes, which knocked it from 360 to 292. So that's about another 5 years off. So now you're only doing a 20 piece.
Right. Which is where we're at.
About where we're at. So there's nothing there to signify that he done anything.
Plus his brother's out.
Yeah, and his brother got out before him. He applied for the COVID relief or early release, whatever it is, applied for the same thing, and he didn't get it. And another thing is he's still not out. He's not. People keep saying Meech is out. He's not out. He's not out until January of next year.
Right.
And the story that I heard with Cowens was that she cooperated on a gentleman named Terry White that was a drug dealer because Terry had inadvertently, to her knowledge, used her address and setting up, I don't know if it was a stash house or something along those lines, but he used her name on it. So her being fearful that she was going to get caught up on something, she went to Jack, and I don't even know if this is true, but she went to Jack and said, hey, this is what's going on. I need help with it. She didn't even want anything for it. Jack used it. They arrested Terry. He went to jail. And then she was paid $55,000. And then after that, that was a one-time payment, sent her that, and then Jack retired. Then she started working with Cromer. And how the story goes that I heard, and these are what's in papers, that Cromer said, we want you to start working with Mexican-American or Hispanic-American supply countries, meaning, I guess, cartels. And she goes, well, would I be getting paid? And he was like, depending on the bus or whatever. And he said, what about Meech? Can I get my boy a time cut? And he said, I would have to check on that. So number one, he's not even authorized to make that deal. That's going to have to go up somewhere else. It's going to have to go all the way up through probably the Detroit prosecutor's office because he's in prison. So someone high up the food chain is going to have to make that. And again, my thinking is if you're going to give someone like Meech, who at the time and probably still is one of the biggest African-American drug traffickers ever to be taken down, who are you going to give up? El Chapo?
Sure.
Like, you're not going to get that kind of time cut for giving up a corner boy. And so what my thought process is, even if that was said, even if he did ask, the answer was probably quickly, hell no. And so then it began the relationship between them two. Because even in the documents, it said that she was given credit. They refer to her as CS1. Mm-hmm. She was given credit for CS2's work in turning in people and getting paid for it.
Right.
And that right there, from what you said earlier, makes it a no third-party agreement possibility because if you're getting paid, that's a first-party agreement.
Right, and that's my point. None of that, when I said she received nothing, that was in the realm of Meech. I mean, whatever she did on her own was for her own benefit.
Right.
And whether or not this nebulous statement, oh, can I get some for my boy? That's a far cry from let's sit down and get some third-party cooperation under the guidelines conversation. Just can I have some meat for my boy? It's like Oliver, please, sir, may I have more?
Yeah.
And then with whatever this relationship is or was, she got, they paid informants. I mean, It's the worst kept secret in the world.
And whatever 50's doing with her, he's claiming he's doing a documentary where she's going to tell everything. But the thing is, if she goes and contradicts anything she said on the stand already, she's going to be open back up to prosecutors. There's going to be a lot of problems.
That, and it opens up other avenues of attack for any convictions. I just think, enough's enough already. He's a snitch, you're a snitch, I'm a snitch. Yes, I investigated the man, but for Christ's sake, he did his time. Yeah. Right? Fair and square. Yeah, he did it. The government, the government's ready to let it go. Let him live, let him enjoy time with his son. Yeah. And enough, it's just, but constant, I get the alerts and all the time. Meech said this and Meech said that. Meech did not snitch, okay? And if you want, you go do 20 years, right? Yeah. In the federal, you do 20 years federal time, and then you tell me how you feel. Well, I couldn't do it.
And largely it's coming from a gentleman named Cuffy. He's saying that he was set up because Tammy's name was in the paperwork. Cuffy was introduced to a gentleman named Fidel Suarez that I guess Meech met while he was in county at some point in time. And maybe Meech set them up to an agreement to do something outside, or maybe he was going to get a piece. I mean, at the end of the day, Meech is a drug trafficker. So
exactly.
That possibly could have happened. But the thing is, Cuffy didn't get arrested for dealing with Suarez, which would have been who Meech used to set him up with. He got arrested because he actually robbed Suarez. He robbed the product, never paid him. And so at that point, if I'm Meech, I'm pissed at him that you just robbed the plug I've turned you on to. Then he starts dealing with the undercover cop. He gets arrested. When he gets his paperwork in what's called the Franks hearing, he sees Tammy's name in there. So he's reaching out to Meech through mail correspondence saying, why is your name coming up in an indictment for me with this person? And he's like, and Meech never respond. That lets me know that he's got something going on. Who the fuck is going to respond to that?
Exactly.
You're putting yourself in the middle of a drug conspiracy and you're already in prison.
Right. And how do you respond to something like that? That's if. Yeah. That could just simply be because, let's call duck a duck. Cuffy could just be the same guy like everybody else who's going to try to say, oh, I know Meech, and writes a letter to him to try. Because in federal court, sometimes silence is acquiescence, which is an admission. Mm-hmm. So how do you respond to that? Yeah. If I was Meech's lawyer, I'd tell him, throw it away. You never received it.
Exactly.
Because either way you answer it, however you answer it, you are screwed.
Yeah.
The minute you answer it, you're in a conspiracy.
And that was, he said he sent it certified, so we know he got it. But
there's you know what I mean, though. But there's no way to answer it properly.
Yeah, there's no way. So it's best.
So it's best just to say, hey, I ignored it.
I think I'm interested to see how all this plays out because I'm like you. Meech did 20 years. He, as they say in the streets, stood on business, took it. He could have told on a lot of people.
Sure.
He even said he could. A gentleman, I'm not going to say his name, but he said Meech apparently seen some of the episodes me and a gentleman named Pete did on him. Said he appreciated how we broke it down. And he was like, tell them boys, he said there was a many of people that I could have told on. He said the Mexicans, the Colombians, even some brother. I mean, like we could have told on anybody.
Anybody, politicians.
Yeah, politicians. He was like a lot of hands were out. A lot of hands got fed a lot of cash, and I didn't say shit. So I've got to believe there's enough for me to believe Meech is solid.
And in the past, I hinted at it because I was under the impression that he might have cooperated. I retract that, obviously. I got it from Jack, but too, it's like, he learned the lesson that we all learned, when he ate, everybody ate with him. But, when he starved alone. And, I know what that's like a little bit myself. But like I said, I wish him well. I wish him well.
Well, and that kind of brings me to the next part of this. So after this case is over, your life kind of takes a different turn. Talk us through those events.
Well, shortly. So the BMF ended. We wrapped it up, December of 2004, January 2005. Moved on to other things, and I was moving on to a cold case murder wiretap that we were going to do out in California, listening in Atlanta, but running it through California, where the subject was. And then on March 11th, 2005. My girlfriend at the time, who eventually became my wife and my mother of my son, she was trying Brian Nichols, a rape case in Fulton County, who ended up breaking loose from sheriff and murdering Superior Court Judge Roland Barnes and our court reporter, Julie, and Sergeant Hoyt Teasley and Dave Wilhelm, a federal agent. And after that, nothing really, I can honestly say nothing was the same for me after that. It's just life just kind of lost its allure for a minute, or for a long time, and started drinking heavily, and then which led to drugs and leaving. I left the DA's office, and we started a defense practice, which just lent itself to more, more late nights, more money, more drugs, more alcohol, until eventually I was arrested in May of 2012. And then I was arrested again. And then one more time after that. And just for good measure, again. But by that point, they had already taken my bar license, my law license. And, in March of 2015, I started doing construction. And, it took me a little while longer after that to get clean. And, still drank for a while, bartended for a while, I just hit 3 years, no alcohol.
Congratulations.
Thanks. And, I think 6 years, no drugs and at all, not even a stumble. So I'm good. I feel good about that. It didn't mean, it sure as hell didn't make every day much better, all the time better. But, some of the rougher days, it would have made it worse.
Well, and I've heard you and I have spoke, we actually Ubered here to the studio where we're at, my buddy Matt's house. And you were telling me that, had your wife not been dropping you off at the airport, she very well could have been a victim that day at that courthouse.
Yeah, I for years I got the call of what was happening as we were getting ready to taxi to take off for California that day, and so that's 4.5 hours, knowing that there have been a couple murders, but not knowing anything else. And for years, I blamed myself, thinking I could have been there. We were supposed to be there, do a hearing that day. I would have been there with some uniformed officers who would have had guns. And, initially it was she was mad that morning because I asked her to drive me to the airport because I was going to make her late because we're trial lawyers. We have a routine, and but missing it, she missed, by being a couple minutes late. We could have changed. We were talking the other day as we hit the 20th anniversary of it, and she brought that up. That rather than trying to beat myself up for not being there, maybe look at it like our son is here because of that.
No, that's a good way to look at it. That's a positive spin on it. Now, when you separated from your partners, you were doing your own thing. Talk to me about some of the clients that you were working with, because you said that led to late nights. I mean, sometimes depending on your clientele, you're not always going to be meeting in the office.
Sure. I had a little niche thing going. I was good at Fourth Amendment law and search and seizure, motions to suppress. So, I had a smattering of what everybody would consider undesirables. I mean, I had my cartel. I did have the cartel, a group of cartel clients from the Gulf area. They always met in the office, between 7 o'clock and midnight for some reason, depending on what time the money got across the river. Then I had my Russians who for some reason they don't wake up until 2 a.m. in the morning, 2 a.m. And, then, it was just, you do criminal law. You're not meeting with people, at the, you're not, at the club and getting 18 holes in,
Right.
Or different types of holes, but I mean, these are people. So and then you're working hard all day and then you're going out and then you're drinking. And when it was just a zero sum lifestyle for me, something was going to give. Fortunately, and I don't know, people think I'm crazy when I say this, but fortunately I was arrested 4 times. And eventually, I got my head out of my ass on this.
What caused you to come out? Because a lot of times they say sometimes you got to reach rock bottom. Sometimes you got to hit rock bottom a few times,
Sure.
Keep up and keep dropping to come out. What was your final straw to say, all right, I'm done with this shit?
So, my son, he was, and he was born in 2008. So I was still struggling. I mean, I hadn't even been arrested when he was born. And then the last time I was arrested in Cobb County, I was indicted, and I had to turn myself in. And I asked my ex-wife, his mother, if she would testify at the bond hearing for me. And she said, well, what do you want me to say? I said, well, say that I'm a good dad, that I show up, that I'm there. She goes, you are when you're here. She goes, well, what kind of good dad, what kind of man who says he loves his son, does this bullshit and keeps getting arrested for this shit, and now going to put me on the stand. And it struck a nerve. And she was absolutely right. And as she sat there testifying on my behalf to get me a bond that last time, I couldn't have been more ashamed. But having him, just putting all my energy into him, and he's unfortunately or fortunately, he's just like me, except he's better looking and a little taller. But he's such an amazing man, young man at 16, and I couldn't be more proud. But you have those moments in your life where you look at, you feel sorry for yourself. And you say, "What did I do to deserve this?"
Yeah.
Well, I've had 3 times the amount where I look at him and I say, "What did I do to deserve this?" He's truly the love of my life, and it got me. I've always been very honest. I wanted him to know what happened to me so that he could avoid this.
Right.
And he's just wise beyond his years. Being his daddy has been the best thing for me.
That's good. That's awesome. I remember you said when I reached out to you, that was one of the first things I seen when I reached out to you and I found you. And I don't know if you seem like a private person on social media wise, so I won't say where I found you, but I seen a picture of you and your son, and we started talking, and you said you told him you were going to do some podcasts, and he's like, I've been on the History Channel, I've been on the Stars, but I told him I was going to do podcasts, and he was like all excited, like that meant more than those things. So tell them we appreciate that.
Well, I absolutely will, and I told him so. I said, I'll give you a shout out rated, and he goes, yeah, okay, cool, brah.
Yeah.
But he is just phenomenal. He has the best of both of us. Good looking kid, Yeah. Sarcastic as hell, but I love him to death. I couldn't be more proud of him.
Do you ever think about writing a book or a memoir of anything of everything you've been through so much from different spectrums? Have you ever thought about it?
Briefly, but we could talk about that another time. I don't even know where to begin some days.
The beginning is the best part from what I've been told.
Sure, it's like we could talk about that another time. I just don't know, I don't know where the story ends.
Yeah.
I'm beginning to think it never will. Somebody told me the other day I needed to stop drinking Red Bull. They said, it can kill you. I said, the only way Red Bull will kill me is if I pass out after drinking one and fall into a cage of lions.
Yeah. Because
at this point, it's gonna be epic no matter what happens.
Rand, thank you for coming on the show, my brother.
I appreciate you, man.
Sir. It's been a good time. Ladies and gentlemen, that'll do it for this episode of Crime and Entertainment. We'll see you next week.